Connecticut. I crossed the state line into Connecticut, and my surroundings changed drastically. Affluent neighborhoods with roads of fresh asphalt. I saw Lamborghini and Porsche dealerships across the street from each other. If the Bronx felt like Guatemala City, Connecticut felt like Zurich. I rode past the WWE World Headquarters, and they're practically printing money over there. I realized I had underestimated the mileage I needed to make it to New Haven, so I would put in extra hours to crank into the sunset. I decided to wear bike shorts today, but the hot sun made me chafe badly. 60 miles in, I was rubbing badly and could feel a good rash coming on. 15 miles outside of New Haven, I came across a small town that looked different from the others I'd seen all day. Everything looked run down, and I didn't see any nice cars. This guy in a lowrider rolled down his window and jokingly said, "Hey, give me that bike." I told him we can trade. I saw these kids riding mountain bikes shirtless through the street, and they were all popping wheelies for days. I told them I thought the wheelies were sick, and they looked back at me to make sure I knew they didn't care what I had to say. It started getting dark, and I needed fuel to reach my host home in New Haven. Nothing around caught my eye, so I opted for the Golden Arches. It was the last thing I was in the mood for, but I figured I could get a lot of soda pop and a meal for cheap. I realized I was getting more than I bargained for when I got inside. I was greeted immediately by life-size statues of their cartoon mascots in the lobby. There was a themed play place that resembled something you would find in a mall food court. There was a separate room for birthday parties and several booths resembling a San Francisco trolley. While I was eating, I read all the interior signage. There was a big heart-wrenching poster about how this is a great first-time job for teenagers. It was the, "You don't want to be flipping burgers your whole life, but you should be doing it before you graduate college" type of campaign. I was slightly offended by how they try to make a good image for their workforce, even though the corporate system doesn't lend itself to a fair work environment. In my experience, the corporate higher-ups continue to pass unrealistic expectations on management until all the stress trickles down onto the lowest-paid workers, and everyone is burnt out from the maximize profit for the shareholders business model. If you sold a good product and gave employees agency, maybe it could be a better workplace with actual opportunity. But that's just my 2 cents from working in the restaurant biz. My opinion is that there should be employee ownership for all workers. I trudged on into New Haven and rode along the beach during sunset. The smell and sounds of the ocean rolling into the sand melted my heart. I made it to my host home for the night, and the family was gone for their son's clarinet recital. They left the door open so I could clean up before they got home. They had a workout area and bike shop in the garage and set out an air mattress for me. Joe, Sean, and their 2 boys came home after a while, and we started chatting. Joe was a teacher, and Sean manages opera singers. I thought that was a power couple, if I've ever seen one. The whole family plays music and sometimes played together in the recording studio Joe built. Their son is a classically trained organist and pianist, among the other instruments he can play. They were all avid cyclists and owned enough bikes that I had to stop counting. They had taken a family trip on tandem bicycles and kept a cargo bike around, just in case they needed to haul something. I enjoyed how easy they were to talk to. I was really impressed by how creative and curious they were about everything. I could feel their creative juices flowing as they talked about their lives. My buttocks were in significant pain by this time, so their company really helped me stay positive. In the morning, I cleaned my bike up, loaded all my gear, and hit the road into the heart of New Haven for lunch. I followed the ocean most of the way before shooting inland toward downtown. There were two specific places I needed to eat at. First was a joint called Frank Pepe's Pizza, and supposedly it's the best pizza on the East Coast. It sits in an unassuming Italian neighborhood and seemed chill at 11 a.m. I was one of the first people inside and immediately got a table. I ordered a margarita pizza and a ginger ale. The flavor was outstanding and didn't give me the heavy feeling that pizza usually does. I noticed a crowd of folks with thick New England accents and nice suits starting to pile in. I let my imagination go wild thinking about the trope of mobsters having a lunch meeting. I came back to reality and paid my tab to find the next spot. Next, I visited an establishment called Lewis Lunch. Apparently, it's a pub that has been around since the 1800s, and it was turned into this little restaurant shack. The story goes that they were the first to put a hamburger steak on bread and call it a hamburger. I arrived and found a small log shack with colonial-esque typography on the sign. There might be 10 or 15 seats inside, but it was jammed wall to wall with people waiting on to-go orders. They had custom iron burger smokers and a toaster that seemed to be from the 40s. The air was filled with smoke, and I loved every second of it. They'd been cooking them the same way since the beginning. Cheese, onion, tomato on white bread. That's it. The owner was working behind the counter, but there was no time to ask questions. I waited about 20 minutes to get my food and was relieved to get outside into the fresh air again. I savored the burger and was adequately full from my 2 lunches. I felt I deserved a pat on the back. On my way out of town, I rode past Yale University just to mark Ivy League number 2 off the list. I followed a bike trail to the town of Bristol and visited a friend I hadn't seen in a decade. Bree is a woman I know from church growing up, and she was a few years older than me. She lived with her husband Brian in a little town home and worked a lot. I was lucky that either of them was available to host me. They both had salaried jobs that required them to travel frequently. Bree graciously cooked us dinner and we had a quick catch-up. They both had to go to bed early and leave for out-of-town jobs in the morning. On my way to Hartford, Connecticut, I stopped at a Dunkin' for a chai latte and a couple of donuts. During my visit, a kind gentleman with a thick East Coast accent approached me. He asked what I was doing and how he could help. I tried to write down my website, but before I could grab the paper, he said, "Yeah, just take this, man," and handed me a few dollars. I love kind humans. While prepping my bike to leave, another older man wearing a Cubs hat started talking to me. He explained that I should be concerned about the crazies on the streets. He left me with some words of wisdom. "It's crazy out there. They're playing baseball and shooting each other." I'll hold on to those words as long as I live. I noticed that Dunkin' Donuts are everywhere on the East Coast. I had seen literally over 100 since Washington, D.C. I love cheap donuts and ended up stopping at one almost every day. In KC, I hardly ever go to Dunkin' since they're mostly in the burbs. There are also better places for donuts and coffee. The slogan, "America runs on Dunkin'," should be, "New England is built on Dunkin'." Its main competitor was Starbucks, which had an equally impressive number of locations. They seemed to always be next to each other, similar to the Walgreens and CVS rivalry. I made it to Hartford around noon and was ready for lunch in the capital. The traffic was crawling due to road construction. Pedestrians were going all speeds and walking out into the street unannounced. Imagine pedestrians jumping out of stores onto the sidewalks at full speed without looking. I was in full Frogger mode through this 2-mile stretch of downtown. I eventually made a turn and beelined it for the Capitol building. I only wanted to snap a picture of the Capitol and eat lunch. I rode around observing the rustic architecture and eventually asked a security guard where the Capitol building was. He seemed not to know the exact location, but tried to give me directions. I followed them and ended up riding in a circle. After this unsuccessful detour, I searched for a place to eat. As I was locking my bike up, in the corner of my eye I read, "Chicken and waffles." A whole restaurant dedicated to the best soul food in existence. I leapt with joy across the street to experience this patriotic accomplishment. I sat at the bar stool counter, ordered an Arnold Palmer, and then studied the greasy menu. There was too much to handle in one sitting. I settled on getting a couple of appetizers instead of one plate, and I chose well. The first was chicken and waffle sliders. My second choice was the chicken fingers breaded in waffle mix and deep fried. Oh my God, these things were heavenly. I gave up on finding the Capitol and focused on the treacherous task of getting out of the city. Maps was confused and put me in the middle of an interstate. I knew that couldn't be right. I saw a guy on a moped hauling ass down a sidewalk, and that confirmed I was in the right place. This sidewalk was adjacent to the interstate just for people like me trying to cross the river. I biked up the narrow upward hill and found a place where I had to cross an on-ramp to get to the bridge. As I waited for highway traffic to slow down, I saw this 18-wheeler come to a complete stop right after the exit into the shoulder. He barely missed the off-ramp and didn't want to loop around to make up for the mistake. I witnessed this truck slowly and dangerously back up in the middle of a 6-lane highway intersection with multiple off-ramps and then proceed to turn onto the ramp. It was sketchy. I was sure I would witness a wreck, but thankfully no one crashed. I arrived in the evening at my host home in Mansfield, Connecticut. I was surprised to pull up to a house hand-built in the 1700s. Everything was hand-milled from solid logs, and the doors had blacksmithed latch mechanisms. The inside smelled of cedar and elderberry. The owner, Stefan, wasn't around because his wife had just had a baby in Boston. He hired local students from Yukon to take care of the property, and they showed me around. Stefan told me the place was a pub in the 1800s. He had a deep sentiment for this property. "I feel more like a caretaker than an owner of the place. You can't really own something with that much history." More on Stefan later. I set up my tent in his labyrinth of a garden in the backyard and promptly went to bed as soon as it got dark. I was glad to have made it to my destination and sleep among history. I made an early start on the historic hills of this Connecticut community. I saw more houses similar to Stefan's, a 500-year-old tree, and an old mill that used river power to operate before electricity. I was riding through forested rolling hills and loved every moment of that brisk morning. I eventually grabbed the US 6 and was greeted with a big sign that said no bikes or pedestrians. Are you kidding me? There was no good alternate route, so I rode it anyways and took the risk. One exit up, the turnpike portion ended and turned back into a typical US highway again. Stupid. I liked this highway due to its wide, comfortable shoulder. It was like the lazy boy of US highways. I came across a small chapel, the Federated Church of Christ, that caught my eye with a sign that advertised, "Ye Old Thrift Shop." I knew I needed to visit. I tried to avoid thrifting too much on this trip, lest I spend too much money and ship too many things home. I spent $3.50 on a pair of new hiking boots and a book. I paid cash to the dear old woman volunteering that day. A well-deserved detour. Connecticut was quaint and cute. It was a primer for the rest of New England. It felt like riding through a history book, and I was here for all the experiences.